The state may call its next witness.
Sherri Fentress.
The evidence you submit to the court and jury in the trial decision should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Good morning. Mr. Dean.
Morning.
Good morning.
And you're here because you conducted some DNA analysis in this case, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your first and last name?
Yes, my name is Sherri Fentress. The first name is spelled Sherri. Last name spelled Fentress.
What is your profession and where do you work?
I'm a biologist forensic examiner for the FBI Laboratory DNA Casework Unit in Quantico, Virginia.
And how long have you worked there doing that type of work?
I've worked there for about 14 years.
What does your work consist of there? What kind of matters do you work on?
As a biologist forensic examiner, I perform primarily work on missing persons and unidentified remains cases, in addition to some other criminal casework. As an examiner, I will receive case information and determine what pieces of evidence need to be tested based on that information. I'll determine what the best course of testing is for those items, and then I am the one who will coordinate the movement of the evidence through the laboratory, directing the work of biologists along the way, and making key decisions at certain points in the testing.
I'd like to ask you some questions about your education, training, and experience that allows you to perform this type of work, okay? Can you tell us a little bit about your education first?
Yes, I received a Bachelor of Science in Animal Science with a concentration in Agriculture Biotechnology and minors in Biology and Chemistry from the University of Delaware. And then I went on to receive my Master of Science in Criminal Justice, specializing in forensic science from Michigan State University.
What about training?
In order to be an examiner, I go through a training that's about 2.5 years. It consists of practical laboratory exercises and oral boards, as well as moot courts, in order to make sure that not only do I understand the fundamentals behind what I'm testing, but also that I can express it in a clear manner for you in court.
And experience?
My experience, in addition to working for the FBI laboratory, spans about 10 years prior to that. I worked for the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory as a graduate intern. I worked for a private laboratory also, and then for the 5.5 years prior to working for the FBI laboratory, I worked for the state of Delaware.
Have you testified as an expert witness on matters concerning DNA in courts before?
Yes, I have. I've testified in both federal and state courts.
And have you been admitted as an expert in each of those instances?
Yes, I have.
Now, at this time, I would offer Dr. Fentress as an expert in the area of DNA analysis, forensic biology. No objection, Your Honor.
All right, she is so entered.
Okay, and Your Honor, just to clarify, it's not Dr. Fentress. I have a master's, but not a PhD.
Pardon me, thank you. Thank you for the correction. I just figured with all of that education.
Thank you.
Okay. Were you asked to conduct something called a kinship analysis or kinship comparison in this case that we're here for today?
Yes, and a kinship analysis is just an evaluation of relatedness between individuals.
And what did you receive to conduct the kinship analysis in this case?
In this case, I received a number of bone and tissue specimens. We would term those questioned items because we do not know where they came from or the individual that they came from. And I received reference samples from 3 individuals, Billy Joe Howell, Henry Moss Jr., and Leilani Simon, to compare to these unidentified remains.
And what is it that you're trying to figure out in a kinship analysis, as simply as you can put it?
In a kinship analysis, I'm just testing to see whether the relationship that's proposed could be supported by the comparison of the profiles that I obtain from the evidence. So in this case, I want to see if the unidentified remains could be the child of Leilani Simon and Henry Moss Jr.
And how do you go about conducting a kinship analysis? What do you do?
So in order to conduct that, we first need to test the items to recover DNA from them, and that involves a sequence of steps in the laboratory. We first take a small cutting or sampling from each of the items. We then will isolate the DNA, and then in the next step, we determine about how much DNA we were able to recover in that first step. And based on that, we can optimize the remaining steps where we do amplification, which is where you make billions of copies of targeted regions of the DNA. And then the final step where we determine exactly what is the profile at each of those locations. And just to clarify a little further, for the DNA casework unit, we look at 21 different locations that are expected to be different between individuals with the exception of identical twins, in addition to 3 locations that will provide information as to whether the individual who provided the DNA is male or female.
Now, was the technique you used in this case, is that something that can be tested?
Yes, it's something that can be tested for validity, yes.
And has it been subject to peer review and publication?
Yes, it has.
Are there standards controlling the technique?
Yes, there are standards called the Quality Assurance Standards that are issued by the FBI that define everything from what personnel qualifications are required down to handling the evidence and what types of laboratory procedures should be performed for each type of evidence.
And has it attracted widespread acceptance within the relevant scientific community?
Yes, it has.
Okay. When you conduct a kinship comparison or kinship analysis, how do you phrase your ultimate results or conclusions? What does it sound like?
So when I conduct that kinship comparison, like I said, I'm comparing the profiles against each other. So what I would say is that based on the comparison of the DNA profiles, the results are however many times more likely if the individuals are related as stated than if they are not related.
And I'd like to draw your attention specifically to 2 items that you tested in this case. Do you see in front of you a document marked as States Exhibit 79?
Yes, I did.
And how many pages is that document?
It's 2 pages.
Now, these are bones that had already been examined by the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Christensen, before they came to you, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and we've heard testimony from her that she'd already identified these bones as human bones. What are the images that you're looking at? What are those from, and what do they show?
The images that I'm looking at are 2 of the bones that I tested. I can tell that they are, am I allowed to hold up the?
Well, let me get it
Okay.
into evidence first.
I can tell that they are bones that I tested because they are the laboratory number, 2022-02600, the item numbers, 29-1 and 30-1, and I recognize these pictures from my case notes.
Do they fairly and accurately depict these bones as they appear to you in the lab when you were working with them?
Yes, that is correct.
Your Honor, I would introduce this as State's Exhibit 79.
No objection, Your Honor.
879 is admitted without objection.
Now, can you, I don't want to put this on the screen, but can you hold that up and walk the jury through what it is that that you're looking at there?
Yes, so if you can see, this is the item 29-1 bone. If you see there's a square taken out of the center there, that was the cutting that we took in order to do the processing. And then on the next page, this is a little harder to see, but it's item 30-1, and it is a small bone right there in the center. Because of the size of the bone, we had to use the entire bone for this sample. So there's no specific cut area that you will see.
There's not an additional photo showing like a piece of it cut off because you had to use the whole thing.
That's correct.
Okay. You were able to take these two bones and develop a DNA profile of the person from whom they originated?
That is correct, yes.
And you were able to compare that to DNA samples from Henry Bubba Moss Jr. and from the defendant, Leilani Simon?
Yes, that is correct.
And you were able to come up with a conclusion as to how likely it is, or the likelihood ratio for whether the person from whom these bones came is those two people's child, right?
Yes, I was able to develop a likelihood ratio explaining how much support there is for the relationship, yes.
And what was your conclusion in that regard?
Your Honor, may I refer to my report to state the conclusion?
Yes, ma'am.
Starting with the item 29-1 bone, based on the STR typing results and the comparison of item 29-1 to Moss Jr. and L. Simon, the combined kinship index is approximately 4.1 quintillion. Therefore, the DNA profile obtained from item 29-1 is approximately 4.1 quintillion times more likely if item 29-1 is from the son of Moss Jr. and L. Simon than if item 29-1 is from someone unrelated to these individuals. And these results provide strong evidence that item 29-1 originated from Quentin Simon.
As to the next bone in Exhibit 79?
And for this one, based on the STR typing results, the DNA profile obtained from item 30-1 is approximately 12 quintillion times more likely if item 30-1 is from the son of Moss Jr. and L. Simon than if item 30-1 is from someone unrelated to these individuals. And these results also provide strong evidence that item 30-1 originated from Quentin Simon.
One moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any cross?
I do, Judge. Good morning, Ms. Fentress. How are you?
Good morning, I'm doing fine, thank you.
Okay, I don't get people like you on cross-examination very often, so I'm going to have a bunch of questions for you that I don't get to ask, okay? So let's start. Kinship analysis is, are you looking at alleles or genes or DNA? I mean, I don't understand the difference between the two.
Sure. So alleles, genes, and DNA are all related to DNA. When I say that I'm looking at different locations and I'm looking at the profile at those different locations, that would be where I'm referring to alleles. So to take a quick step back, when we look at the nuclear DNA, we're looking at what are called short tandem repeats. And those are short patterns of DNA that are repeated back to back to back. And that number of repeats may differ between individuals at any given location, and it can also differ between locations within an individual. So as I mentioned, we look at 21 of those different locations. What I had yet to say is that we receive half of our DNA from our mom and half from our dad. So at each of those locations, you would expect to see no more than 2 of those numbers. So for example, if at one location I'm a 15-17, it means that I received a 15 from one parent and a 17 from the other. So you're going to expect to see 1 or 2 numbers at each of those locations. Now, when I do my comparisons, where I'm looking at that unidentified profile compared to the potential parents' profiles, what I'm looking for is that pattern. Do I see 1 number from each parent at each of the locations in that questioned or unknown item? And if I see support for that, then I will go on and perform that kinship calculation for the statistic that I mentioned, that 4.1 quintillion or that 12 quintillion.
And the reason why I ask that is this is kind of me nerding out a little bit, but when you're doing the DNA, I mean, DNA is an amazing structure, is it not? Okay? Yeah. But basically what you're doing is looking at, and how many, let's just say, on a random piece of DNA from any person, how many different, I guess you would call it, locations are there in that strand of DNA?
So there's a large number of different locations on that strand of DNA, and actually, to clarify further, most of our DNA is actually going to be the same. That's what makes us human. It's a very small percentage, less than 1% that will differ between individuals. Again, that's the exception of identical twins. So we in our laboratory target 21 of those locations.
How many locations are there?
I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many locations are there. Thousands, I don't remember exactly how many.
So you target 21 particular locations and these other three locations. So you narrow your analysis down to basically 24 sub-locations, right?
This is correct.
And I'm curious, the bones you tested, one was 4 quintillion times more likely to be related, and the same bone tested differently was 12 quintillion times more likely to be related. What accounts for that statistical discrepancy?
So there are two different components that are tested. When we obtain a DNA profile, I would say a common misconception is that if you obtain a DNA profile, you just got DNA and that's all that matters. But really, that profile range anywhere from one of those locations all the way up to the entire profile that we're targeting. The fewer locations you have, the lower that number is going to be when you have a calculation. So for the first photo, I was able to get 20 of the 21 locations for comparison for that mentioned statistic. And for the second photo, I was able to get all 21 locations. So that's where it gets like differences in numbers.
Now I'm curious. And I'm fascinated too by the actual manner of that. Obviously, you take the bone, and I guess what would you do with the bone once you did it?
So once again, we want to make sure that the bone is clean on the outside. So we do some washing of the bone. We will then sand the area that we're using that we're going to touch with what's a drug tool. If you're familiar with that. And then we will take the cutting again from the tool of that small section that we're going to be testing. We then get something called a freezer mill that freezes the bone and then uses a magnet to crush it into a fine powder. And then the powder is what we will then light up chemicals to in order to isolate DNA.
And then you take the DNA and test that. How do you get your statistical analysis to test the DNA after that?
Mm-hmm. So once we have tested the DNA and obtained that profile, again, we'll do that visual comparison first. If in that visual comparison, I didn't see evidence of parental-child relationship, I would say that was an exclusion, meaning those remains not have come from a child of two individuals. Because I saw that pattern, I then took those profiles and then I uploaded that into a kinship calculation software. And what that software does is it analyzes the supposed relationship and based on the population frequencies or how often you see these different profiles in the population, it provides that statistic for how likely those profiles are if individuals are related as stated.
And my profile as well. I don't know what words out. My understanding was it shows the genes, genetic markers. How does it display that? Letters or numbers? How does it
So that profile or not in the form of a table. So in that table, each of the locations is listed, and each of the locations where a profile is able to be obtained, you'll see the number. So for example, for location D3, you my dad at 1517. At another location, we have TA, another location, it may 22, meaning 22 is from mom and 22 is from dad. So again, at that table, which location, and then with a set of numbers associated with that location, and that provides the profile for the individual.
And just like curiosity, said that you're very notified to do this. How are you? And I'm not trying to pry. I'm just curious. How old are you?
I'm 45.
Okay. And you got your Bachelor of Science from the University of Delaware, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you got your Master's of Science from Justice. I didn't write down. Which university was that?
That was from Michigan State University.
How long is a Master's take?
I would say 2 to 3 years.
Okay, so that's Bachelor's was normal your degree.
That's correct.
And 2 to 3 years your Master's, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then on top of that, you went to extra training at the FBI from about 2.5 years, I think it says 2.5 years.
Yes, as an examiner. Yes.
And part of that was they trained you how to present testimony and evidence or be explained or people like me, correct?
Yes, correct.
And of course, how to do the job itself, right?
Yes.
And how long did an examiner at the FBI?
I've been an examiner at the FBI for 10 years now. Prior to that, I was a biologist.
And how long were you a biologist?
I was a biologist for about 4 years. And so my mind is different from biologist, the laboratory processing, and an examiner coordinating that processing.
And as an examiner, you basically, what you just described, you take the bones, you test the bones, and you translate that into, I guess, the results that you test that, right?
So as an examiner, I would assign the test strategy for the bones. I would coordinate the test testing. There's any question biologists will come to me, and there's questions about how to proceed. There are several steps along the way where I have to make a decision as to how to proceed. And then once data is produced, I analyze that data, I generate the report with conclusions, and then I'm one with a test by those conclusions.
Ms. Fentress, thank you so much for telling me. I appreciate it, and it's been so wonderful too. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, with me, please.
Yes, right.